Test, test. Hello.
I'm good with that. All right.
Cool.
Check 1, 2.
Check.
Check.
Check. Check 1, 2. All right.
Go ahead.
All right. So today is episode 5 of the Music Cafe. Welcome, listeners. And this should be on the new YouTube channel now. So today we have been doing, this past few weeks we've been doing a series on kind of the process of moving through the whole cycle of creating a product all the way to putting it out the door and making sure people hear it. So we've gone through the songwriting process with Kuda the other day. That was fun. And then we had the actual recording process. And today we are diving headfirst into mixing. So I am going to hand it over to Scott because he's the guy for that. Take it away.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, today we are going to, I think we're gonna discuss, I think I'm gonna call it mixing theory. If I were to teach a class on this is what it would be called.
Which you should.
Mixing theory.
Right.
Yeah. So last week we talked about how to, simple ways to sit in your bedroom or your basement or garage or whatever and record your stuff into some software gear that you should look at and other things. And now that we've kind of covered that, and now you've got some stuff down, either if you're an artist that are looking to mix, put a demo out there, or as an audio guy that's just getting started, this is going to be definitely some tips and rules to follow and things to think about as you are mixing the song. So should we just dive right in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's dive right in.
All
So
right.
let's set the scene.
Yes.
We have recorded the song. Let's say, how should we format this? Like,
all right, so you recorded the song.
Let's just say singer, songwriter, guitar.
Yep.
And then let's say they added drums.
Some
or whatever.
drums.
Drums and
like
bass.
a basic.
Let's say just a
basic
classic
rock
kind of
band.
like classic rock pop song.
You've got your bass guitar, you've got your drums, you've got maybe an acoustic guitar in there. You've got a little bit of keys and then vocals.
Right.
It's an easy way to do it. Okay. So the first thing, after you get everything recorded and you're looking and you have your software and you've got all the tracks laid out, where do you start? I like to start with the rhythm section because that's where the basis of the song comes from.
Right.
Right.
Now, technically, in this scenario, they're all the rhythm section, right?
Except for
the vocals.
That's true. Except for the vocals, that's
Right.
very true. So start at the bottom of the rhythm section with with your
Okay.
kick drum. The bottom of the rhythm section.
No, you like burped in the middle of that.
It's a coffee, man.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. The bottom of the rhythm section with the kick drum. And you want to just solo it out, listen to only that track. You don't want to do this for every track you go through. So solo it out, listen to that.
I will add, this is a good point, and this is where I make mistakes, and this is where I see other amateur recording artists make mistakes. They will create, let's say, MIDI drums is probably the easiest way for people to have drums because not many people have a drum kit in their house. They are creating these MIDI file drums in the same track. This changed the way that my track sounded because when you have all of your percussive instruments in the same track, you cannot split those up in the pan or in the mix. They all have to be the same volume and the same spot at the same frequency. So you need to have a kick drum track, you need to have a hi-hat track, a snare, you need to have a new track for every single instrument. Even the tom drums, you need to have a separate track for each of those. So the way that I do it is I will make the beat in one track. That way it's just real easy to make, and then split up and make extra tracks and like copy and paste basically you know, the high tom into one track, the low tom into the other track, hi-hat in another, and so on. So then split it up from there and then begin the mix. Now we're at the kick drum.
All right, kick drum. All right, listen to it, pull it out, solo it up, listen to only that. And what you're doing at this point is kind of making sure that everything got recorded well. You got good recording volume. There are no what we call noise in the track. And what I mean by noise is anything that you don't want to hear. So you want to hear the kick drum beat, but you don't want to hear like, you know, any distortion or static or like the dog barking
or like someone mowing the lawn.
Yeah, right.
Because that ended up in one of mine.
Oh,
I had to keep it when I was like in high school. I made one, and my dad was mowing the lawn, and I was like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
I can't do anything about it now.
Yeah, well, you listen to, I mean, if you listen to the last couple, you hear my dog barking in the background, right? That's what we call noise. Anything you don't want to hear. You listen through that, and then you kind of want to get an idea of where you want that sound in the mix. And we'll talk about what I mean by that as we go through. Kick drum, and then you work your way up through the drum set. Kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat, toms, overheads.
When you're talking about working on that, what are you talking about specifically? Are you checking the EQ or the volume?
Not yet. My first listen through to each individual track is make sure it recorded well.
Okay. Check for the noise.
Check for the noise, right? Make sure that you had good volume.
Right.
You can make some minor EQ adjustments. You know, or get an idea, but it's more like
to at least, and wouldn't that go along with getting rid of the sound?
Yeah, getting rid of the extra noise, right? So if you have to like cut out a lot of high end stuff or a lot of low ends or whatever, you can make those general adjustments.
But this is this kind of goes along with our talk, like our little touch on mixing that I totally just botched up because I don't know enough about this, but I know enough about subtractive EQing.
Right.
So this would be a good place to when
start.
Right. So like this is all you would do for like starting the mix is you would subtractive mixing is you are only taking out frequencies that you don't want.
Correct.
Right.
That's exactly right. And you do this for every track. So you go through all the drums and then you would go to the bass guitar and then you would go from the bass to guitar to the keys and then any other guitars like acoustic or electric guitars and then any lead parts like the vocals. So for this example, that's all you have. So you work through all that, vocals, and as you're doing this, you can actually get a general idea of what the song sounds like and what you want. You kind of tune your ear to what you want it to sound like at the end. Right. You're not making those adjustments yet, but you're getting an idea. It's kind of a rough draft. Right. Okay. Do all that. Then I put all of the faders or the volumes up. So you listen through every track individually, make sure they're all good. So the panning
faders. Or are you talking about
faders? Volume.
Like volume.
The output volume, right? So if you're looking on software, on a mixing console, at the bottom you'll see a knob that you can move up and down.
Gotcha.
And that's called a fader.
So you want them all at 0 dB?
That's what I put them at. I put them at all at 0 dB, put everything equal, and then I listen through the whole song a couple of times like that.
Okay.
And that gives me a general idea of the song as a whole rather than each individual track.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I follow.
Right. And then I take a break.
How long of a break?
It depends.
Like a day?
No,
a week?
no.
Couple hours?
Couple hours.
Okay.
Yeah, because it gets you...
Let's say,
you'll notice.
How much time do you think that has taken you so far? From start to your break?
If you're just starting this process, it'll take you a couple hours to get used to it. I can do it probably in 20 or 30 minutes.
Okay.
Because I've just done it a million times.
Right. You've got the process, you know,
down
where you're going.
At this point of the mixing process, it's very technical. It's just very by the book, step 1, step 2.
Right.
And as you know how to do it, you just get really quick at it.
Okay. So let's wrap those up again. You make sure there's no noise. You listen through each track individually. Make sure there's no noise.
You can do some general adjustments to get rid of
subtractive EQing if you need to, if like things are obvious to get rid of, and then put everything at 0 dB if you want, just whatever's the same volume and good for you to listen to. Listen through the whole thing, take a break.
Yep. It's a good place. Okay.
Cool.
Get yourself some coffee or
gotta get
lunch or whatever. As audio guys, we drink a lot of coffee.
You gotta stay focused.
Right.
Yeah.
And generally, I'm usually doing this either early in the morning. I never mix in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Unless I have to. It's usually in the morning when I'm like
way late at night.
Wake up or way late at night.
Right.
You know, and then I'm working till like 2 or 3 in the morning
and that's usually the case with people who are doing actual production jobs, is because usually the bands have some side gigs and then they can't get in the studio till late at night.
Right. Or you record all day and then you stop at 5 or 6, you have dinner, you start mixing at 7 or 8, and you're working until midnight or 1 or whatever. So anyway, okay, come back, done your listen through, and then at this point I basically break the instrumentation down into chunks. Right. So like instruments. So then I'll take all of the drums, I'll take everything out and listen to only the drums together.
So all your percussion tracks, kick, snare, hi-hat, toms,
overheads,
you name it, shaker.
Yep, right.
Egg shaker.
Well, usually not like the auxiliary percussion. The main drum kit.
The actual beat.
Right.
And like fills and things like that.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'll listen to only that. And at this point through the listen through, I am listening to how each instrument, each drum sounds together. Okay. Are like, does the kick and the snare, because that's one of the most important pieces of the track that gives you the beat, the kick and the snare. It's you take those and you listen to them together and you see how they sound together. Is the snare drum too loud? Is the kick drum too muddy? Is it woofy or is it punchy? How do I want it to sound like in relation to the snare drum? Right. Well, it also determines what kind of track you're wanting to mix. So if it's just a general rock track, like this example, you kind of want the kick drum to be punchy. You don't want like a woofy sound. That's more like jazz, because jazz, it's not as important to hear the kick drum as much. Right. With rock or even hip hop, definitely, you want that just punch. And the way you get that is if you know, you can make these EQ adjustments at this point. You want to cut out some of the mid to low frequencies, boost the low frequencies.
Like way low.
Not super, super low. Not like
that's the woofy end.
Not like 40 and below. But anywhere in the like
around 60.
Yeah. And then the 200 hertz range, cut that all out. Because that gives you the woofiness, actually, that low mid range.
Oh, okay.
And then if you want to have the kick drum, if you want to feel the kick drum, not a lot of people realize this, and I learned this from doing live sound. You want to boost the high end of the kick drum. That click, that punch through, and you'll hear it through everything else, not necessarily feel it. So you're listening to the kick drum and the snare together, and you're making the adjustments. You're going back and forth between the two, and you're getting an idea of how they sound together. Okay. Once you're happy with that, well, we'll move on to the snare. So the snare drum, I like a kind of a, I don't like a ringing snare. Like if you hit it, you hear that bing sound.
You don't want a resonant snare. You want something dry.
I kind of want something dry, but also like a nice crack. Right. So I usually cut out most of the low end. Bring up the highs a little bit. I usually put some compression on it and talk about what that does in a while. And then that way it's separate from the kick drum. But kind of its own thing.
As it should be.
As it should be. Yeah. So you're getting a balance of how you want those two together.
And again, this is all purely on taste, the EQing. But there are some, these are kind of like general guidelines of what you should aim for. I mean, every instrument has its natural frequency range. So really the end goal should be that you are trying to make these sound as natural as possible. As if you were hearing it firsthand. And you can you can hear everything in the mix. So you have to make them sound as natural as possible in a way that they are not getting in the way of the other instruments. So this is a good guideline of where you should aim for to make them sound natural.
Yep. And at this point, too, I will make some panning adjustments as well.
Right.
So moving the sound left or right in your headphones, or if you're listening to a stereo mix. And this is important because it does achieve that separation of everything. And plus, it makes the mix sound a whole lot bigger.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that makes I don't know if it makes any sense to anyone. But it makes it sound wider in the headphones.
It's supposed to, the way that it was explained to me is that it creates the illusion that you are either in the band playing and you have the other
stuff around
players around you,
right?
Or you are an audience member and you are basically watching the band in front of you and listening to them, and you can hear all of them in different directions, basically.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And so there's really no like hard set rules about how you should do this, but there are some guidelines that you can follow. So a lot of people will take the snare drum and they'll pan it to the left a little ways, because if you're sitting behind the drum set,
you're the drummer.
You're the drummer. The snare is slightly to the left of center.
If you're a right-hand drummer.
If you're a right-hand drummer, which most people are, but yes. And I like to do this because if you're rocking out in your car and you're air drumming, you're sitting behind the drum set. Right. So you're gonna
like to do it from the drummer's perspective.
I like to do it from the drummer's perspective. Some people
like to do it from the audience perspective.
The opposite, right? So the snare drum is on
the left side. No, the
right side.
No, if you're be the right side.
Right side. Right.
Yeah.
That's all right. And you can do that with everything in the drum. So like if you think about it, the high tom is almost directly ahead of you, if not a little bit to the left. The floor tom's all the way to the right. So I'm making those adjustments. All right. So we did the kick and the snare, and then you add in the hi-hat, EQ it, make it the sound the way you want it. Think about how it sounds in relation to the rest of the drum kit. And like Joe said, he put it really well. You want it to make it sound as natural as possible. Like you were sitting in the room listening to the drummer play. Right. High toms are tricky because they're not used that often. So what you're going to want to do in the software is loop a little section of the song where they play the high toms a bunch of times. Just put it on loop so you can listen to it and make the adjustments as you can. I don't think high toms get enough love from people. No. Because if you're even in live sound, so if you're sitting there listening, if you're watching a drummer and he's playing the snare, and most of the time the snare drum's pretty prominent in the mix, you're hearing it well, and then he does a fill, I want to hear that fill.
Right. That's a little stinger on it, and it really gets the beat moving, you know?
Correct. I don't want to miss it. Like if he goes to the tom, I don't want to lose any substance in that. So I like to have them a little louder than most people. That is definitely a preference, and everyone has their own preference. Okay, so high toms, and then overheads, which is just a couple of condenser mics over top of the drum set, and those you will hard pan one to the left and one to the right to achieve that bigger sound.
And hard pan meaning
all the way
over,
and
all the way to the right. Correct. And basically, the room mics or the overhead mics, basically what that's trying to achieve, if you are even recording live drums, what that is basically achieving the space of sound.
Yeah, the room,
the overall
acoustic
pickup of the so like the general sound of the drum kit, and not each drum instrument separately. So it kind of picks up the
whole thing.
It helps out mixing the drums and making it sound natural as if you are hearing it first person. Right.
And before we go too far, I want to introduce the idea, and I kind of did this last week, that there are different planes, virtual planes that you can think of while you're mixing. There's a horizontal plane, left and right, you know, where you can put each sound on that plane, left or right. There's a vertical plane, would be loud or soft, right? And then there is actually another one. There's a depth, a front to back plane, where like the distance that you hear things, either softer or louder or with more effects on, and you can put everything somewhere in those planes. So what we're talking about now really with the panning is the left or the right, the horizontal plane, and then the volume is kind of the vertical plane.
Okay.
Right.
Now, some people would say that the volume could also be your first stage as the depth,
sure.
Because you've got the singers at the forefront, the drummers are in the back a bit. So you kind of create that depth as who's closer to you by who's louder.
Right. And that is definitely a part of it. I think effects like reverb, delay, will add more to the depth.
It'll add more to it, but essentially, like the way that it was explained to me is like creating that natural landscape of the musicians there is left to right, who's on the left and who's on the right, and how do those actual instruments, even through all the toms and the snare and the kick, how do those line up if you were looking at the band and just looking left to right? Or from the drummer's perspective, how does everybody line up in respect to you left to right, And then whoever's closer to you is basically, always got to be from the audience perspective, because you can't just have the drums be super loud and the vocals are off in the distance because he's farther away from you. But from the audience perspective, the singer is closer to me. That's who I'm paying attention to for pop music especially. So that needs to be put in perspective. Like whoever is louder, that's who you're boosting the most in volume, and then the guitarist, and then so on and so on. Now, there are some tweaking as far as like having the kick drum be louder or at least equal with the guitar and stuff like that. But the perspective is like panning left to right, volume front to back.
Yeah,
that's the
I
kind
see
of.
What you're saying.
So what do you mean by like the vertical?
I think, dog. Well, I guess it's more of a visual thing for me. So if you're thinking of volume faders, they're vertical. That helps me think about it. I don't know. I think when you get down to it, I don't know. I've always thought about volume more as the vertical plane. Right. And then, yes, as you move it down, it's kind of a curve, I guess you can think about it. As you bring it up, it curves up and comes closer to you, but also gets louder. And as you bring it down, it goes farther away and gets softer. So it's more of a curve. But the effects will definitely add more to the depth. And I think that relates more to the. But that's
a later process. So
for sure.
I will make a note that curve thing that you're saying. So what Scott is saying is that you've got all the volume faders either in your audio workstation like Logic, Fruity Loops, whatever you're using, Pro Tools. He's saying that there's a curve to all the faders. This should be right. If you have a fader like right next to each other, one is way down and one is way up, you're probably doing it wrong.
Correct.
They should not have a drastic difference between each other. They should be
generally
They should be generally along the same volume, and there should be a curve to it because that is naturally how instruments are. There's nothing that is just like so loud in contrast to another instrument in there. Right.
That's true. Okay.
So,
a little side note there.
Yeah.
Did all the drums, made sure they sound pretty good together. Okay. Then what I do is I move on to the bass guitar.
Yep.
Right. That's the next instrument. And what's important to remember is that the bass guitar and the kick drum are very similar, and they work. And if the band is good, they play together.
Yep.
Right. So what I do is I listen to the bass guitar and the kick drum together and see what happens. Right. If I need to make some EQ adjustments to make to separate the kick drum and the bass guitar a little bit, then I do. I usually add some compression to the bass guitar. And what compression does is it literally takes the signal and the peaks of the signal and squishes it, right? So it makes everything more even.
All the high ends, and it brings you down to a level that you want it, right? And then it takes the low ends, and it brings you up to the level that you want it.
Of the waveform, whether it be high or low, as you're looking at it, the higher or the low, it brings those closer to the middle,
right?
And therefore makes the middle wider, right? So it makes everything more even,
right?
Especially if it's like, you know, if he's slapping the bass or anything like that, or if he's picking it,
there's going to be these crazy peaks in there.
So I almost always do something with that, with the bass guitar, because I like a very even bass sound throughout the whole track. Because I think you lose a little bit of substance if you don't do that, and it makes everything sound like, you know, as you're listening to it, you're not like flinching every time he hits the bass guitar because of the peaks. So we do that. Listen to that in relation to the drums, and then I bring up all the rest of the drums, and I mix those two together. So between the drum set and the bass guitar, I balance them how I want them to sound.
But you're listening to those all at the same volume.
All at the same. Yes.
But you're gonna start bringing it down.
Then I make the volume adjustments to each one. So like the kick drum and the snare and the toms and the overheads and the bass guitar, I'm mixing those together the volumes that I want them in the mix.
So technically, in this scenario,
yes,
they should already be at 0 dB anyway.
Correct.
So then you're just soloing those out,
right?
Listening to them, and then you're bringing whichever one's down that you need down,
yep,
right?
Or
to make it sound more natural.
A little bit. Right. I'm actually balancing the volumes of them together.
Right.
At this point.
Right, but you're not boosting anything.
Not really. Not unless I absolutely have to.
It isn't it like essentially like similar to your subtractive EQing.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to bring down what's too loud,
right,
and leave everything that needs to be loud at that 0 dB.
Correct. If you're bringing anything above plus 5 dB on your meter,
you're gonna have to bring it down later.
Well, yeah, that too, but you're also doing something wrong.
Okay.
There's other ways that you can boost it. So if you got your fader, one of, like, say you've got your drums mixed and then at a certain volume, and then you bring your bass guitar, and then in order to hear the bass guitar, you have to bring it way up.
Right.
Like plus 5, plus 10, something like that.
That's where you get in a vicious cycle that you're just boosting everything on top of each other.
Subtract. Then you say, okay, well, let me bring the bass down to 0 dB. Let me start there, and then bring the drums down.
Right.
Right. So I do that. And I do that for everything.
Right.
So then I do the keys, or next usually I do the keys, and then I listen to that in relation to the drums, and then I add in the bass, and then I make the volume adjustments again and then I bring in the acoustic guitar, and then I bring in the vocals.
What is the key to mixing keys?
It depends on what they're doing.
Like that?
What the key is to mixing keys?
Hey, yo. All right, go ahead.
It really depends on what they're doing. So if they're just like a pad, they're just playing chords, I kind of treat them like a bass guitar.
Okay.
Right? Just in a different frequency range.
So like if I were to visualize this on an EQ spectrum, wouldn't you basically see it as if you are looking at the keys of the piano, being that the low keys are at the low end and the high keys are at the high end?
Yep.
Basically, if you know where they're playing, kind of generalize, actually visualize where those keys are on the piano and kind of focus on that area.
Yep. I almost always do some sort of low cut with keys because I don't want them.
You don't want them taken away from
the bass guitar.
Right.
Right. Unless it's a synth that's playing bass notes. In which case, I will leave it and try to find a balance between the two. But let's say for this practical purpose, it's just like a piano, general keyboard sound, not playing bass notes.
And sometimes people will mix piano and bass, and it comes up with a really good tone. Right. But you need to find a way to balance them, of course. Right.
So if they're just playing chords, and pads, I will treat them like a bass guitar, and I will, if they're recorded in stereo, which you should almost always do, then I will pan them left and right. Sometimes not hard left and right, but separate them somehow so you get that width of the mix, right? If they are playing some sort of melody line or playing off another instrument, so let's say the acoustic guitar and the keys are kind of doing the same thing, but they're playing off each other. Right. I will find a way to make sure you can hear them both together. That way, you get that, you hear both, like, so the acoustic guitar plays something, and then you want to hear the keys play it again, right? So they have those the same volume, but maybe panned on different sides, right? Okay. It depends on what they're doing.
Now, are you the type of guy that puts your bass towards the center of the mix?
Almost never, actually, at least lately.
Like, how far off do you put it?
Not very far, unless...
Cause like,
so for this example, I would probably put it... lately, I've been putting it to the right a little bit.
Okay.
To balance, because I put the snare on the left, and people usually play the snare pretty heavily, and so if you're listening on headphones, you're hearing a lot on the left side.
So you need something to counter it.
So I need something to counter it. So I put the bass almost on the right side.
So what do you center up?
Kick drum.
Snare.
Melody lines.
You just said snare.
Right. Kick drum.
And the melody
almost
lines.
Pretty center in the kick drum, but if the snare tends to be a little louder, then I'll also put that just a little bit, just a couple of degrees to the right.
The kick or the snare?
The kick drum, right? You got to be careful with that because you don't want it to infringe on the bass guitar. So you kind of have to play around with it and see where it sets
This is the time-consuming part.
This is the time-consuming part. Just playing around and making adjustments, finding out where it fits in the mix. And every song is different.
Right.
But yeah, generally like the kick drum and then the vocals, because that's what you want to hear well.
Right.
That's the main melody line in this example. Okay. Keys, acoustic guitar.
Which is generally the same as keys.
Right.
You're kind of looking for a little bit percussive, mid-range kind of thing. So percussive, high-end, find that mid-range, and then...
The trick that I found with acoustic guitars or maybe like a electric rhythm guitar is you're doing your general listens through a couple of times, right? And then you're like, man, that just seems a little loud. So you bring it way down as you're doing this, like at this point in your mix. You're balancing everything out. You're like, it's just, I don't want to hear that. It's not really doing anything important. It's not the main melody line. So you bring it down. And then this is for this description. We skip ahead and you're doing the final adjustments, and you're thinking to yourself, at least this has happened to me many times, I'm missing something. You're listening through. You got the kick and the snare and the bass, but there's no real drive to the song. You're missing something. Think about what you just took out. You took out the rhythm guitar. That's the driving force behind the song. Playing the chords,
keeps going.
Chunking away. So be careful with rhythm guitars that you don't bring them down too much, because you're going to lose the life of the song.
Right. It's actually moving with the chords and everything.
Right.
It's not.
So I find almost every time I do a mix in the later stages, I'm always bringing it a little louder than I thought I was going to, because I wanted some more drive to it.
Right. Okay.
All right. So you do acoustic guitar, and then usually I don't really do much EQing or effects or anything to the vocals until way later. Right. But I will, at this point, after I get them all the instruments and I'm making some EQ adjustments and balancing them together with volume and panning, then I'll throw the coffee. Throw the vocals on top of it, and I'll listen through it a bunch of times.
Okay.
Just to get a general idea of at this point it's a rough draft mix.
Right.
And then you can bounce it or record it in some way that you can like take it to your car or out to a stereo, or you can send it to the band and say, hey, this is the direction I'm going.
Okay.
What do you think?
Right.
Say it's a rough draft. It's like writing a paper.
Right.
You've written all the ideas out. You've got a general idea.
Except when writing a paper, you don't have to write it on a bunch of different formats of paper. You don't have to write it on cardstock, and you don't have to write it on loose leaf. Like with mixing, you need to take it to a ton of different speakers because, you know, it might sound super awesome in your headphones, but then throw it up on a set of speakers or even like, you know, a
in your car.
Beats Pill or something like that, and it sounds like crap. Which brings me to my next point that I wanted to bring up with you actually, and I don't think we've ever talked about this one.
Okay, so time out on the mixing process.
This is with it actually. Oh, okay. Yeah. One tip that I hear a lot in my YouTube studies. Yeah. YouTube University. Is people will say you should be mixing in mono. Now, some people might take that as you should mix solely in mono, which is not the format anymore. No one listens in mono anymore, but I get the theory is that if it's not going to work through one speaker and nothing's going to show through, then something's wrong to begin with. Yep. So I guess I kind of balance the 2 points that they make, and these studio engineers that make this point is create the song in stereo, or like create the mix in stereo, move it to a mono speaker, see how it turns out. Yep.
And in most mixing consoles or even your software, certain plugins can do this for you. Right. It will act. You can just push a button and it will take the stereo mix and put it in mono. Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Logic does that. Yep. I think it's like you can see like the output signal, and then it has like
should be on your stereo bus.
Somewhere. Right. Something like that. And then it's like there's like a little, I don't know what the icon is anymore. It's been so long since I've been in Logic, but you just click it and it switches it from a stereo output to a mono output. So that's a good way to do it. Yeah.
And it's easy, and what you want to do is you just want to go back and forth. You know, if you get your rough draft and your mix done, be a good point to do it. Make sure that you don't lose anything in the mono mix. You don't have to do a lot of mixing in mono, but it's a good reference for you to use.
See what got lost.
Right. Your rough draft mix, you switch it to mono, you think about it, you write down some notes, what you noticed, and then you can go put it back in stereo and make the adjustments. And then go back to mono, see if they fixed it. Right. I've never sat there in mono and mixed.
I think that's the wrong move.
I think so. But it's a good reference to have.
Right. I think it's a good reference point, but I don't think it's the way you should do it because nothing's in mono anymore. Right. You go get a cheap pair of headphones, they're still playing in stereo, and pretty much, you know, who listens to speaker recordings anymore? If you're not an audio guy, right? Or, you know, who even has even a Beats Pill plays in stereo.
It does. That's
right. It still has multiple speakers in it that are playing stereo.
Yep. Exactly.
No one has a little who makes those tiny like one speaker things like that you get at
like iHome.
Right. And no one buys that. Like, you know.
Yeah, they're like $12.
Right.
At Best Buy.
Right. And if you're buying that, you're not caring about the sound. So I mean, that's a whole nother.
Yeah.
That's a derailment.
Okay.
That's the derailment for the day.
Yeah. But that's a good place to do that. Okay. Then you take another break. And at this point, you may want to take a break for a day.
Something to definitely, if you're still thinking about it by the time that you get back to it, you haven't taken long enough of a break.
Right. So this is break number 2. And if you're just starting out, this is one of the longer points of the mixing process. Just
the time consuming.
The time, you know, listening. Remember we listened through all the tracks and we got a general idea, and then you took a break, and then you came back and made adjustments to each track. Right. And you made a rough draft mix. That rough draft mix is probably going to be the longest point of the mixing process.
That when you come back from your first break. So that between end of first break, beginning of second break, that should be the most time
and it'll probably be several.
How long does it take an experienced?
Couple hours. Oh, for sure. I'll spend multiple hours at this point.
Yeah. Which flies by.
If you enjoy this, which hopefully you do, if you're spending
don't waste your time on it if you hate
definitely enjoy it. It goes by really fast. You
just get in the zone and
you get a rough draft mix out and you're like, oh man, it's been 4 hours.
Yeah.
right?
Just like that.
So step away. If it's late at night, go to bed, right?
Right.
If
you're not totally wired, that you can
wired on coffee or something, go at least a day before you touch it again. At this, and if you do it right, you can bounce this mix and send it to the band or the artist, or even if it's just you, don't listen to it again. But if it's just an audio, if you're an audio guy mixing it for someone, send it to them. Let them think about it for a little bit. Make them write some notes down, and then in a couple of days, come back to it.
Right.
Because it gives you a fresh perspective. My dog wants to come in and see us, but she can wait out there. It gives you a fresh perspective and fresh set of ears. And if you don't take a long enough break, what you'll notice is you start what we call mixing in circles.
Yeah.
You make an adjustment. You think it sounds great.
Right.
And then when you listen back to it again, like the second or third time.
Right.
Yeah. You lose it. All right. So now you've come back from the break. You got your notes from the band. You've got notes from kind of other thoughts that you've had since you last put it down. And at this point, you are making more fine-tune adjustments to each track.
Such as
EQ, effects, compression. And what I usually do is, if I have to, I will listen through each individual track again.
Make sure it's sounding
natural.
Make sure
it's sounding the way I want it to sound.
Right.
But almost at this point, you should have that all pretty under control, and you can listen to things in groups, right? So you listen to like the drums and the bass together, and then you listen to the drums, bass, guitar together, and then you listen to, if you have the guitar and the keys together without anything else, right?
Right.
And
so
then
you just kind of play around with that, just
back
mix
and forth,
all these different instruments, just listening through.
And each adjustment, the panning function, the EQ function, the compression. At this point, you're throwing in effects, right? So you're adding maybe some reverb to your keys, right? Or the
vocals.
Snare drum or the vocals. I don't usually touch vocals yet.
Okay.
I save vocals until almost the very last.
So
thing.
you try to get all
the
instrumentation like finally mixed.
Pretty darn close to where I want it before, because it's very easy just to put the vocals on top of everything.
Gotcha.
Right.
And just find the right EQ spot for it.
Right EQ spot. I mean, and then the vocals are almost always in the center of the mix.
And then nothing else is there at this point except for the kick.
Except for the kick drum.
Right.
So
but they're on different ends of the spectrum, so it's not that hard.
Right. But it is in the back of my head. I got to remember that, okay, the vocals are going in the center of the mix at this EQ range, so I don't want to put anything else there.
Right.
But I don't really throw it in. So I'm making sure that all the instruments sound really nice together.
Right.
Okay. And every adjustment that you make is like a tool in your toolbox to, apply. Right. So you're like, okay, well, I want the kick drum, or I'm sorry, I want the snare drum to be less poppy.
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to pull out my EQ tool
for some reverb. Right?
No. Well, yes, you could do reverb, but I start with EQ. Side note to that.
You're going with the...
Right. So side note to that, effects, yes, if you know what you're doing, you can hide certain things with effects. You can hide out-of-tune vocals or a bad snare drum sound.
Right.
The rule of thumb is you never want to try to hide something with effects. Okay? Because the more bad stuff you have in there that you hide, the worse your mix is going to sound. So what you want is everything to sound good without effects.
And that's what we went with the recording episode, where you just want good source material to begin with. Make sure that that's done and out of the way.
You want, let's say there's a frequency that's sticking out, like the snare drum is ringing. So you need to cut a certain portion of the EQ for that. If you throw on effects to try to hide it, all you're going to do is add more muddiness and noise to your mix.
Right.
Not going to be as clear. You're not going to get rid of the ring sound when it comes down to
and
it.
Hiding it in the muddiness along with that. I've fallen into it early in my days where I just, pile all these effects with no knowledge of them.
Yep.
And then it will sabotage all the rest of your tracks, essentially.
And what you'll find is if you listen to amateur mixes versus professional mixes, one thing that will stand out is the clarity. Right. Yeah. You will hear each instrument. Right. Always. There's not a lot of muddiness, as I keep calling it, to that mix.
Right. Or even overall.
Right. So the way that you achieve that is you make sure that you are that everything sounds good before you throw on effects. Right. So, you pull out your tool, your EQ tool, you make that adjustment, you make it sound less poppy, and then maybe you can throw on some reverb or delay or whatever you want. Right. Mm-hmm. So, think of them as and as you learn more techniques, each technique is like a tool that you can apply to your mix. Because at this point, remember we started very technically, very step-by-step process.
Now this is more...
Once you get past the step-by-step process and you're making the fine-tune adjustments, from break 2 on, it's very much subjective.
Oh, yeah.
And you're making creative decisions in the direction you want to go with the track.
Right. Now, this is the key of taking it to an actual audio engineer to help you out with this, because there may be creative decisions that you want, but you don't know how to get there. Right. Now, your audio engineer can get you there. Right. Right, because the whole idea is that as an audio engineer, I like to think of it as a translator of the artist. So the artist comes in, they're like... Love it. They're like... Great analogy. I really want... I don't know how to do it, but I want it to sound like this. I want it to sound like Kesha. And you're like, they're like, how do I do that? I said, okay. And then you the tools and you know the techniques. Add lots of glitter. You just throw it on your mixing console, and then boom, you got. That's what happens. Track. Yeah. Boom. All right, go on. But yeah, you know the tools that you can then apply to the mix to get to that final product. Right. So each technique, and you're always learning new stuff that you didn't think about, that someone else showed you, or that you found on YouTube, or you listen to a track and you're like, man, what did they do here? So you reach out to the audio guy, or if you know him, be like, hey, how did you do this? And this is a good point. So amateur recording artists that are trying to do mixing for the first time, a lot of what they listen to is when they bounce their track, it's really quiet. Yes. This is a very common problem, and I ran into it, and I always look to the threads to figure out, why is this not working well? And the answer is always, you got a bad mix. And I was like, well, that doesn't help me, because I don't know how to do that. Right. But that's true. That's absolutely true. Once I took the recording classes, that is absolutely true. Now, it gets you halfway there as far as the volume, but you should not be concerned with volume in your mixing. At the mixing point. At the mixing point. This is a totally different process as far as making sure everything sounds natural together. Do not worry about the volume. If you need to adjust the volume, you probably shouldn't even be mixing really loud in your headphones just to save your eardrums a bit. Right. But mixing too loud could probably alter the way you mix, probably. Right. If you're listening to things at a lower volume, you won't fatigue your ears. Right. And that's a thing. Right. Yeah. And then you can actually objectively hear everything. Right. And make those decisions early in the process, to make those necessary tweaks to make sure that everything is heard properly. Go on from what you were saying. No, that's okay. But this is where you first start to achieve the volume, is make sure your mix is correct. There is another process later about that. Right. We're not right. We'll touch on it, but I'm not going to go into the details of it. We can even go on that today, because we're not even going to have a whole episode on that if you don't want. That's true. Right. But yeah, make sure that everything sounds good before you throw on the effects. You do want to keep in mind, though, about the volume thing is
where your volume of each track are at. So if you're listening and you're like, man, this sounds really good, look at your faders. Where are they at in relation to where? If everything's
in relation
below,
to each other, or in relation to
just in general, in general. So if like you're like, man, it sounds really good. If you look up at your headphone volume and it's cranked all the way up,
and
all your faders,
red,
and all your faders are like really low, you're like, oh man, everything's too quiet. I need to back off my headphone volume and bring everything up.
So here's a good question. Let's say you've got a set of speakers set up, and you want to set them to a decibel level that they are playing at. Is there a general rule of thumb that you want them set at to make sure you're getting a natural, like the most natural mix, as opposed to like competitive speakers that you're
in the studio? No.
Okay.
Because it starts with where all of your track volumes are at.
Okay.
Okay. So what you want to do is you want to try to keep your starting point is 0 dB. That's where everything starts.
As far as your output?
Correct.
Your stereo output should be at 0 dB.
No, the output of each track.
Gotcha.
So each track fader volume level should start at 0 dB.
Right.
Okay. And of course, as you go through the mixing process, you then bring stuff lower or higher.
Right.
But you should look, and everything should be within that general area, unless something is incredibly loud, and then it's, you bring it way down, or the effects are a little bit lower as well. But in terms of overall track volume, you want to stick there. Once you get those in that general area, then you bring your
master fader
that are controlling your speaker volume up to a listening level for you.
Right.
Okay.
So let's say, like, if I'm using Logic, how it starts out is the master fader is default set at 0 dB.
Right.
So what I would try to do is mix really low and then try to bring all the faders up together instead of the master fader.
You can do that. You can do that as well.
Because there's only so much headroom in Logic.
Right.
And with the processing power of the computer that can handle that.
What I meant, I guess I spoke incorrectly there. Master fader would be like the overall volume of the track.
Like the output volume of all the tracks cohesively as one stereo mix, essentially.
I referenced that wrong. That should stay at 0 dB.
Right.
Okay. On your interface or on your mixing console, there will be a fader or a knob for your speaker volume, actually listening volume.
Right.
That is what you want to make adjustments to.
Right.
So you've got your master fader at 0 dB. You've got your track volumes in relation to each other somewhere in that range.
Right.
And then you can adjust the listening level with your speaker knob or fader.
Right. So essentially, like, if you're on a MacBook, don't be hitting that little volume button, that used to make that noise. Or if you should be using your audio interface to output your volume
to your
speakers or your headphones, you should find your spot as where you're going to listen to that.
Right.
And never touch it again until you're done mixing, essentially, right?
Kinda. Yes, because you want to keep it in there. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
But if you're going to adjust it, only adjust it on there and not push the mix volume up.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha.
Right.
So to reiterate that, you can adjust the headphone volume, but make sure you're adjusting the right knob to increase the volume. Do not increase it in your mix. Only increase it on the actual knob that is only controlling the volume of the headphones.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
Gotcha.
Exactly. Okay. So you're making your final mix. You've got your listening level where you want it. You're making the fine adjustments. Like we said, this is very creative point in the process. You're making decisions, creative decisions, not technical decisions on how you want things to sound, where you want it to sound like. You get to the point as you're messing around that you get a second rough draft, as it were. Listen to that in comparison to a final track, right? So like pull up an artist that's similar and listen to that mix. Forget about the volume, like, because we're not, yours is going to be a little quieter than that actual produced track from iTunes or wherever it is. But listen to it in terms of what each instrument sounds like, where it is in the mix. Use it as a reference point. to get an idea of how close you are to something similar.
Right.
Right. Make some more notes. Talk to the band. Make sure you include the artist in these decisions. The artist, as a mixing engineer, the artist gets the final say.
Right, absolutely.
The mix.
It's the customer.
And that's how
customer's always right.
The customer's always right. Right. So you're going to make some adjustments. You're going to take some creative liberties, and then when you show it to the artist, they're going to be like, "Well, I don't really like that," or "We need to do more of this thing." And even though you can say, "Well, this is the reason," you can justify your decision. This is the reason why I made that decision.
Right.
And they can either be like, "Okay, that makes sense. Here's," and you can show them what it sounds like with that decision or without it.
Right.
And they say, "Oh, that makes sense. We're going to leave it." If they say, "Nah, not liking it," then you got to shut your mouth. Then that's it. You say, "Okay, we're going to make that decision based on your
right." Now,
need.
Flip the script. Mm-hmm. You're the artist. You took it to the audio engineer.
Yes.
This is the point where you should speak up.
Yes.
That's something
exactly.
You wish you were hearing something
yes.
more
say
or
it.
Right. Say that because this
is
what it is.
This
is what it is at this point.
Right.
All it is just that this is the final mix at this point.
Yeah, stand your ground on what you want it to sound like, but remember
there are some limitations.
Don't be a diva about it.
Right.
Don't be a diva about it. Understand why maybe the producer, audio engineer made a decision.
Right.
Be open to other ideas that you may not have thought of.
Right.
And think of it like objectively, in comparison to your song. Don't be like, "Well, we're not going to do anything. That wasn't my idea."
Right.
Because I don't think that's a good way to make friends.
So essentially that is the mixing process right there.
Yeah.
To boil it down,
right.
You do the creative songwriting part. You do the organization of putting it into your workstation, which brings up another point. Be organized in this part. Yes. Label your tracks. Make sure that you are grouping them in a order that is easy to find. So you have all your drums together, you have your guitar tracks together, your vocals together, your bass together, right. Things of that nature. Color code them so that they're easy to find, but definitely put them in order that makes sense and label them.
Right.
Okay.
That's what we call workflow.
Right.
Right. And everyone.
Well, then you go back, you take the break, and then you're like, shoot, which one was the kick?
This?
And I'm sure it only takes you a couple minutes to find it,
right.
But it takes you a couple minutes to find it,
right.
and that's a waste of time.
And as an audio engineer, if you're at some point, if you're sitting in a studio, in a professional studio, and you're making $50 an hour, the artist expects you to be very fast.
Yeah.
Right. They're paying you per the hour.
Right.
They want to get done as efficiently as possible.
They don't want to be paying someone who's figuring it out
right.
as they're doing it.
They're not going to sit there and wait for you to find, they're not going to let you wait 5 minutes to
right.
find this particular track.
And
right?
almost every workstation has a function that you can label the actual, along the actual time frame of that song,
yep.
that you can mark the chorus section, and you
right.
can mark the verse and the bridge.
Right.
This is also a helpful tool.
It is.
It makes it real quick.
And then you can say, well, the artist will come to you and say, "Okay, well, let's go back to that verse," and instead of you like clicking through a million times to try to find it in the song, you can just push a button or look at the top where your marker is and click right there.
A lot of times they're automatically like, you can click link them by like pressing 1 or
right.
something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
You just push 1, it goes right back to it.
Right.
So, and everyone, as you do more of this, you will adjust your workflow the way you like it. Every single producer, audio engineer, artist's workflow is different.
Yeah. There's no right way to do it, but
no.
make sure that, it's like any job.
Right.
Have your system and just make sure it works.
Right.
But being organized
it's
also helps.
It's amazing to me. Let's say 2 studios have the exact same equipment, same software, same mixing board,
right.
same plugins. Everything is exactly the same,
but set up in a different manner.
The song is exactly the same, right? You give 2 studios, different engineers, exact same song, exact same hardware and software.
Mm-hmm.
If the engineers were to switch places, they would have no idea what's going on.
Right, exactly.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Everyone works completely differently.
Or at least it'll take a little bit for them to get used to it, but
figure it out.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's wild.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
So there's no right way to do it, but this
gives you
hopefully gives you just a kickstart.
Right. Some things to think about, to be aware of, kind of a general process as you approach it. And then once you get the final mix, once you and the artist are happy with the way everything sounds, then you can send it to a mastering engineer. And that is the final gloss kind of over the track. And a couple of things happen here. A lot of people do this nowadays because, studios are becoming smaller and smaller. They're becoming 1 or 2 man shows. So the audio engineer will mix and then also master it.
Right.
In a perfect world, you never want to do that.
Right.
Because you want a second set of ears on the track, and it's a completely different mindset and technique versus mixing.
Right.
So you want someone
that is, again, this is like the fatigue thing, right, or the thing becomes you're mixing in circles again.
Right.
Right. And it's a totally different process. You think it's like the same thing, but it's not.
It's not.
This is where I would suggest definitely send it off to someone to get it mastered.
Right. Pay for it.
And get it done.
If your goal is to put it up,
take it to someone locally. It's really easy. Just take it to a studio, have them master it. They might charge you like $25 to get it mastered.
For a song, yeah.
For a song, yeah.
Right. And a couple of things happen at this point, just so that you know. One, and they're not looking at each individual track. You're going to send them the stereo mix, the left and right 2-track mix. And when they open it in their software, 2 things that happen. One, they will make overall general EQ adjustments if they have to. So let's say in the mix, for some reason, the high end is really, really apparent. Like you're getting a lot of cymbals and like squeakiness on the high end. So what they'll do is they'll pull that down in the EQ just a little bit.
Just to balance it
with the rest
of it. Yeah,
that's right.
It's a balancing act.
It is a balancing act.
Essentially, you got 3 plates. You're trying to spin them at the same time.
Yeah, true.
That's what it is, but it is a different art form.
Right.
Totally.
So they'll make that adjustment if there's a lot of peaks. They may throw just a little bit of compression on everything.
Right.
Just a little bit. If they're good, they're not going to throw a lot of compression on it because that's where you get like the brick wall, red line. Everything is just loud and it's wrong. There's no dynamic.
I'm going to say it. It's downright wrong.
It is.
I know you're not supposed to say that about mixes, but it is
something
wrong.
You should avoid. Right. So they're going to put a little bit of compression on it if they absolutely have to. And then what they'll do is they'll bring the overall track volume up to a competitive level, something you will hear on iTunes or the radio or wherever.
Right.
As a side note, if you're having an audio engineer mix it, he should know that the final mix should have what we call headroom.
Right.
An area where you can bring up the volume without making any distortion or anything like that. Just a little bit of headroom above. You should leave a little bit of that.
So that there's room to play with.
For the mastering engineer to make EQ adjustments or make volume adjustments. Right. Do not send the mastering engineer a track that is
no at its limit. Right.
Don't do it.
There's nothing he can do with it at that point.
That's correct.
Right.
So if you're a starting audio engineer and you're making a mix for someone and you're going to send it to a mastering engineer, remember when you bounce the track, have some headroom for the mastering engineer to play with.
It's like borrowing someone's car and then giving it back to them with no gas.
Correct. That's right.
Right.
That's a good analogy.
Right.
Anyway, so then the mastering engineer makes his adjustments, and don't be afraid if he sends it back to you and it doesn't sound right. Don't be afraid to have him do another 1 or 2. Usually places will do 2 or 3 masters of a song for you for the price that you pay.
Right.
So you can get it back and then you can post it up. So that's the general mixing process, and some theory and thoughts behind it. Anything else you want to add to that, Joe?
What I would add is with a mastering and a mastering engineer with an audio engineer that will be doing your mixing, I would suggest taking the mixing to one person, the mastering to another. If you're good enough that you can get your mixing processed and like you can actually do the mixing yourself, kudos to you. You just saved a bunch of money.
Yep, that's true.
But be real about it. Like if you can't do the mix well, like if you don't know what you're doing, it was all guesswork and you think it's all right, it's probably going to have to be remixed again. Right. So what I would suggest is spend the money. I mean, if you're doing a couple songs, maybe you'll spend like $150 to $200 or something like that. Yep. I mean, you'll have to save up a bit. It's a little bit pricey, but it's worth it. If you're really trying to do it, it's worth it because you can't compete if your songs sound like trash.
That's right.
So I would definitely suggest get it mixed, take it somewhere else to get it mastered.
Right.
And I would suggest that, one, because you got two separate entities and two sets of ears that can take it with a fresh look on it and make sure that it's, you know, it sounds right and then it's competitive.
Right.
Two, the audio engineer, if you take it to someone professional, they have the equipment to actually process it in a manner that your laptop cannot. There is not enough processing power to leave that headroom for you, essentially.
Right.
And then the same for the mastering engineer. They have the equipment to actually get a real good master for it. There's this outboard equipment that costs thousands of dollars.
Right.
And they're not going to charge you thousands of dollars, but they have it there for you to make sure that it's done right.
Right.
And I say that that is the most worthwhile. If your end goal is to create a competitive song, you need to put the money up to use the equipment to make it competitive. There's actual equipment out there that needs to be used. And that's just the fact. You can't do it all in the box.
That's right. That's from a technical standpoint. From a creative standpoint, it's just fun.
Oh, yeah.
To do it, to have someone else work with you on the project.
Right.
Right. It's just enjoyable and it's fun. And that's why we all do it.
Yeah.
Because we all love it.
And even on top of that, you're the artist, you made the song, and then you go to the studio and the guy's like, dude, I really dig this. That's really rewarding. You know, it's your first taste of someone like being like, cool, this is working, you know, like,
Right. And it, you know, it's just,
and if you think, I mean, even so, if it's a song that you think is worthwhile of taking to the studio, it probably is.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm going to throw that out there. A little bit of a plug. If you're looking for someone to mix for you, that's what I do, clearly. So you can reach out to me here on SoundCloud or YouTube, comment, or you can look at my Instagram page. It's at Scott Dean Music Productions. Message me there, either way. But I'd be happy to do a little mix for you.
Yeah. So. And I will say, I mean, this is somewhat a plug, but it's fair.
Yeah.
Scott does do fair price mixing.
Yes.
Absolutely. And he's damn good at it.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
This episode is brought to you by Scott Dean Music Production. Now off to Joe. No, just kidding. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, definitely check out local musicians and local
shows,
audio,
and audio guys, and you know, if you're playing a show and the audio guy, if you're talking to the audio guy and he probably does some studio work, or he knows people that does it, so just talk to people, reach out to people, get an idea of who's good in the area and who's not,
right?
And who's got some fair pricing, especially if you're getting started. Right. Listen to their stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, if anyone out there is like looking for tips, I think this would be good with the YouTube format. If people have questions or are looking for tips or advice, or even like, you know, they want help songwriting or mixing or anything like that, hit us up. And we'll help you out. Yep. I'd be happy to do that. Yep. We could even do like sound design for you or something if you're looking for something cool. Right. But yeah, dude, we're always looking for something to do. That's true. That's very true. So anyway, can't get enough of it. Yeah, that's why we're doing this. Right. This is fun. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers introduction to mixing theory. Yeah. So what's next in this? I don't know. What do you think should be next? Well, we could go into marketing again, but we've done that already pretty well. But we should just do maybe stage. We could do some stage stuff. We could talk about good stage presence, and
we're kind of at the end of the series here,
we are.
Sort of.
Right.
I mean, right now it's just like stage stuff, but
yep, I think that would be the next one. We could talk about how to, what to think about when you're on stage, how to prepare for it, and what audience members are looking for, what works, what doesn't.
Right.
I think that'd be good.
And definitely leave comments if there's things that you want to hear, you have questions about the mixing or any of the series. We can revisit that.
Absolutely.
I mean, geez, we got nothing but time on our hands pretty much as far as this goes. But yeah, definitely leave comments and let us know if there's something that you want to hear or discuss, if something wasn't clear, if we need to make a correction. Yeah, because that could be possible.
That's true.
And then we can address that. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. All right, this is the Music Cafe. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.